Good afternoon and welcome to Book Sandwiched In. Thank you for coming. We also want to welcome our remote audience who's watching us on Twitter today, and reminding the remote audience that if you have a question and would like to send that in, we'll do our best to answer that during the question and answer time. And we thank you very much for supporting our spring season, which is coming to a close today, but we will resume again in September to continue our 60th anniversary year of Book Sandwiched In. And in honor of our 60th anniversary year, today's pop-up mini review takes us back to October 9th, 1962. The book was The Theatre of the Absurd, published by Doubleday just 1 year before, in 1961. And you could buy it for $1.45.
It's an Arto.
You know it? Maybe you could weigh in on the review. The author, Martin Eslin, was a Hungarian-born English producer, critic, scholar, and professor of drama, and it was his book that coined the term theater of the absurd. This work has been called the most influential theatrical text of the 60s by one reviewer, and maybe Mark could weigh in on that opinion for us. This new type of dramatic theater had taken off just a few years before, in 1953, with the startling popularity of Samuel Beckett's Waiting for Godot. Beckett's Tramps Waiting for a Mysterious Benefactor Who Would Never Show dramatized the absurdity at the core of the human condition and the struggle for meaning in a purposeless world. So the reviewers in 1962 were Harriet and George E. Warren of the Rochester Community Players, incorporated in 1923 and the oldest community theater in New York State. Now remember, this 1962 review predates the existence of Geva by 10 years. For nearly 20 years in 1953, Mr. Warren acted as Rochester Community Players' business manager and Mrs. Warren as the artistic director. He died in 1972 and she retired the following year. And RCP continues today as a volunteer organization under the current president, Peter Scribner. According to their anthology, RCP performed Waiting for Godot in the spring of 2004. The director of that production, Gene Ryan, is now Geva's new plays coordinator, and Geva has also performed Waiting for Godot, starring Mark Cuddy. In its early days and today, Book Sandwiched In has looked at new ideas and thoughts in many fields, including theater. And the Friends and Foundation thank you for your past and future support. And now, to look at the battle for Broadway, Mark Cuddy, Artistic Director of Geva Theatre Center, in his 21st season. And he's led Geva in artistic and institutional growth to become a gem of Rochester's cultural community. I'm sure we can all agree on that. Among his many Geva credits are Clybourne Park, The Agony and Ecstasy of Steve Jobs, You Can't Take It With You, Sweeney Todd, Fences, and Five Course Love. He's also produced and directed at the Cape Playhouse in Dennis, Massachusetts, the Sacramento Theater Company, Idaho Shakespeare Festival, and Denver Center Theater Company. Mark is a founding member of the Board of Directors for the Rochester Fringe Festival, and he received the 2013 Performing Artist Award from the Arts and Cultural Council for Greater Rochester. He earned his bachelor's degree in theater with honors from the University of Massachusetts, where he was a Commonwealth Scholar. He lives in Rochester with his wife, theater and visual artist Christina Celian. Their older son, Maximilian, is in the PhD program at the University of Illinois, Chicago Sociology Department. And their younger son, Augustus, is studying acting in college and was just in Geva's production of A Moon for the Misbegotten. So please join me in welcoming Mark Cuddy today.
Thanks, everyone. Wow, some great faces there. And of course, you know, whenever you get an introduction for something like a speech, you start thinking back to, oh my God, I did that? Yeah, I was there a long time ago. Idaho, of all places, for 5 years. Yeah. So welcome. This is fantastic. I'm so pleased to be here, and thank you all for coming out this afternoon and enjoying your sandwich and theater, like dinner theater, right, or lunch theater. Yeah, waiting for Godot, which is how it's pronounced actually, because he wrote it in French, Samuel Beckett, and Godot would be le petit version of God. And that was the last time I acted on stage. That was January of 2000. By the number of walkouts at intermission, it sent me away for 16 years. But it's an amazing play. It truly is. So we're going to talk about Razzle, Dazzle. Someone just asked where that term comes from. Is that a theatrical term? No, not really. Although, of course, it's in the musical Chicago, and it's used often to denote theatricality on stage. And it's written by Michael Riedel, and that's how you say his name, Riedel, R-I-E-D-E-L. So I'm going to talk just a little bit first. Did that just move? Yeah, we're good, right? You can hear me. Good. A little bit first about Michael Riedel, and then get into my thoughts on the book. And I love this chair. I feel a little bit like Lincoln. So, Michael Riedel is a Geneseo native who has been a theater columnist for the New York Post since 1998. And I'm going to take out my glasses because this is 14-point, but it doesn't even matter anymore, does it really? And he worked at the Daily News in New York for 5 years before returning to the Post, and has written for other publications, The Guardian, Harper's Bazaar, etc. He's the co-host of Theater Talk with PBS down in New York, and a contributor to the BBC, among other news programs. And he also made some appearances on the NBC musical series Smash. I don't know if you remember that. It's off the air now. Michael lives in New York City. Razzle Dazzle is his first book. And it made it up to number 7 on the New York Times Book Review. So a great interest. And he actually was in town last fall, and I did a little Q&A with him on the Geva stage last fall. He did some book signings. About his upbringing, his father was the athletic director at SUNY Geneseo. Yeah, pretty cool. And his mother was a grade school librarian. He was described as a smart, sarcastic kid who joined the Young Republicans at age 12 and originally planned to become a lawyer and politician. He enrolled in Johns Hopkins, but transferred after a year to Columbia University. And while at Columbia, he acted in plays and regularly appeared on a radio show devoted to musical theater. The summer after his sophomore year, he interned on Broadway for the first time with Liz McCann while she was producing the Broadway production of Les Liaisons Dangereuses. In 1989, he graduated magna cum laude from and Phi Beta Kappa with a BA in history from Columbia. He's a smart guy. His twice a week, mean, often funny, always dishy, ruthlessly vitriolic behind-the-scenes gossip column has made him the scourge and the talk of the theater world. Really. You're down in New York and you mention his name, someone has, everyone hates him and someone has a story about him. Unapologetic about his desire to create offstage drama, Riedel has mocked and ridiculed the biggest names on Broadway. He says, "I'm mischievous. You have to expect they'll be thin-skinned, and you have to expect they'll get mad at you," says Riedel, who, "I like it when they fight back. I love the debate." Now, in 2005, he was the subject of considerable press himself when he was in an altercation with the English director David Laveau. At the Manhattan Theater Hangout, Angus McIndoe. Now, Angus McIndoe, the theater, bar, and restaurant, just closed last year. But everyone used to go there, all the artists. Riedel, who later admitted to being tipsy, insulted Laveau by claiming that English directors often ruin classic American musicals. Now, while rumors circulated that Laveau hit Riedel so hard that the columnist had to go to the emergency room, but apparently he was just shoved to the floor and wasn't injured, unfortunately. Riedel adores being the center of attention. At a press party for the Tony nominees, he joked with the producer, "Hey, someone needs to do a revival of Murder on the Orient Express, and I could play the victim." Yeah, I'm sure he'd love that. Which brings us to Razzle Dazzle. It's a fascinating tale of real estate, power, unscrupulous producers, theater owners, talent, drugs, and marketing. Just like Hollywood, or Rochester on a really bad day. I loved it. It's dishy and entertaining. Like his column, it includes great characters, colorful characters that are too real to make up. You know, you couldn't make this stuff up. And includes behind-the-scenes stories that I had never heard of. So I knew a few of them peripherally. There's so much in here that I just ate up. Now, it's not a book about the history of Broadway. And when Michael was up last fall and I was doing this Q&A with him at Geva, someone asked me, well, why isn't there more Stephen Sondheim in the book? I was like, well, he didn't work at a Schubert theater. So this is really about the Schuberts. He had great access to the Schubert family over the years, and he's described the book as using the Schuberts as a Christmas tree upon which to hang everyone's stories. It's many important people and other stories are left out, but it's about how the Schuberts and their organization and the foundation controlled and saved Broadway, Times Square, and perhaps in the 70s, Manhattan itself. Now, I love history, so I especially loved the first 100 pages or so that describes the beginning of the theater district in Manhattan and the 19th century organization called the Syndicate. Now, has anyone read the book yet? Has anyone read the book? Okay, great. So I can just make stuff up because none of you know. It primarily follows the three Schubert brothers, Levi, the oldest, Sam, the middle brother, and Jacob, or JJ, the youngest, who came over with their family. They were immigrants from a town on the Poland-Germany border. No one exactly knows where their town was. They came with their parents in 1881. And they wound up, of course, in Syracuse, New York, where all Polish Jewish immigrants land, where they shined shoes and sold newspapers as teenagers, and they fell into the theater business there in Syracuse after seeing a David Belasco, the great showman, a David Belasco show. And they, of course, evolved to become incredibly wealthy real estate owners and Broadway producers. Now, these brothers were really intensely driven kids, making up for their alcoholic father's failures by the three of them being completely abstinent. They never drank. And they were on the streets working at 10 years old, 12 years old. And they were famously ruthless. In time, J.J. Schubert would be the lone remaining brother, and often compared to a Hollywood mogul like Louis B. Mayer, or those guys who were just Napoleonic. But first, in order to get success, they had to battle the Syndicate. The Syndicate was a group of five guys, five theater owners across America who owned all of the largest theaters in the big cities across the nation. And so that made them formidable when negotiating for shows and artists. You had to take their deal. The Schuberts eventually, though, brought them down through buying real estate in all these cities and just building more theaters. If they couldn't run the Syndicate's theater, they just built theaters themselves. And that allowed them to attract first-class acts. They actually were quite good to artists compared to the Syndicate. And Riedel describes their battles with great, great flair. There's even a Rochester connection, don't you know? So I'm going to read a little section here. Of course, Rebecca is very, clear when she invites you to do this. Don't read long sections from the book. I'm not, but here's a little section here. So one of the syndicate players, one of the owners, is a guy named Erlanger. And Riedel writes that Erlanger was only vaguely aware of the Schuberts, as Sam Schubert was building up his little circuit in upstate New York. So he started buying little theaters and touring shows there, which by now included the small Baker Theater in Rochester. But when the owner of the Lyceum, Rochester's best theater, bristled at Erlanger's terms, the syndicate wanted 50% of the profits from every show that played at the theater. Erlanger decided to anoint the Schubert's Little Baker Theater as the official syndicate house in Rochester. Sam agreed to the terms because he meant he'd get all the best attractions from New York. But then the owner of the Lyceum, fearing his theater would end up with second-rate shows, relented. Erlanger preferred the Lyceum and rerouted his productions there. The Schuberts would now get the second-rate goods, and they were in no position to fight the double cross yet. But they never forgot it, and within 1 year, they marched onto Erlanger's turf, New York City. So that kind of revenge factor, plays a great deal in this book and down in New York. But the Schuberts, once they moved into New York and started owning theaters, they saved them. I mean, they went bankrupt and then bought all their theaters back in the Great Depression. They didn't let them go to other developers after the Great Depression. And they would have easily been torn down, like so many of the great Rochester theaters. And then later, in the late 70s, they led the movement to clean up Times Square, although that took about 15 years to do, but they did it. However, the story is primarily about real estate, which is what New York City is about. Manhattan is all about real estate, right, no matter what business you're in. And tickets, the avenues to their wealth. Now, not all of the avenues were clean and legitimate. Broadway was run by corrupt and greedy people through most of the 20th century. There really weren't a lot of laws. Two such examples of illegitimate schemes are described in the book, and they're called ICE and Flow. So let's talk about ICE. And I'll read a couple of passages. In 1963, David Clerman was a special assistant to the Attorney General Louis Lefkowitz, the state attorney general. And Clerman got a phone call one day about shenanigans and accounting procedures on Broadway and how investors were being duped. Everyone seen The Producers? Okay, well, that's like real life down there. I'll read you a couple of just a little tidbits about what was going on. This is in 1963. Whatever its murky history, ICE is a function of supply and demand. Broadway theaters seat at most about 1,800 people. If a show's a hit, a lot more than 1,800 people want to see it. And they want to see it from the best seat possible. The show is, of course, sold out, but somebody, usually a ticket broker, this still goes on, right, can help for a price considerably higher than the face value of the ticket. So to get that ticket, the broker has to bribe someone, usually someone at the box office. And that bribe, the difference between the face value of the ticket and the amount the broker paid to get his hands on it, is what's called ICE. Now, a broker might pay, $5, $10, $15 above face value back then, depending on the now it's hundreds and hundreds, based on the popularity of the show, to get a ticket. The broker would then resell that ticket, for as much as $50 back in the early 60s. This could be a $10 or $15 ticket. The box office man pocketed the bribe because it was cash. It was untraceable. It melted away like ice. Right. For years, box office treasurers, which are the managers, it's a union, never asked for a raise. I love this. They didn't need to. They were running, as one producer said, their very own concession stand. Unbelievable. Clerman discovered that it wasn't limited, though, to box office personnel. Many people, theater owners, general managers, even producers, were taking their cut. Anybody with access to tickets could flip them to brokers, including writers, directors, designers, and stars, who in their contracts would guarantee at least 2 prime orchestra seats, house seats, per night, right? And that still is the case. So Rudy Valley, remember Rudy Valley, the singer, hello, baby, right, with a little microphone? Rudy Valley, one of the stars of How to Succeed in Business Without Really Trying in the 60s, openly shopped his house seats around Times Square to the highest bidder, usually the Hollywood ticket office, a broker. It was also said that Frederick Lowe, the composer of Brigadoon and My Fair Lady, Lerner and Lowe, the great composer, lyricists, traded the house seats for fur coats from friends in the garment business. Many a chorus girl in a Frederick Lowe show was known to keep warm in the winter with one of Freddie's furs. Clurman discovered that a Broadway leading lady, whose name he would not give up even 50 years after the fact, had a deal with a broker who paid her $10,000 a year for her house seats. Right. A well-known Broadway producer had bags of cash delivered to his East Side townhouse every night. So someone had to, organize all this as well. And during one of his investigations, Clurman discovered that the distribution of tickets and bribes wasn't limited to Broadway box office, but that there was a theater chain had centralized the market. The Shubert organization controlled 17 of Broadway's best theaters, and the company also owned the Sardi building, they still do, on West 44th Street. And 4 floors above Sardi's was a room number 504, set aside for a special purpose. Here, brokers or their runners went to buy tickets for shows in Shubert theaters on the box office. Sometimes there was a line out the door. Every Monday, one of the runners would deliver an envelope stuffed with the cash to a man in 504. And that man, Murray Hellwitz, a distant cousin of the 3 Shubert brothers, would be running the room, and et cetera, et cetera. So that kind of great, I'm not going to read anymore, great tidbits of all the colorful personalities, and that's only on page 11. Right? I started making notes I'll read a little bit. I'm on page 11, a 400-page book. But the investors were the ones who were getting duped. And this is the last thing I'll read about this. The Clurman, the investigator, was an expert in accounting, and he was shocked to discover such clauses in investment papers for investors in Broadway shows as this, quote, "Our audit was conducted in accordance with generally accepted theatrical accounting principles. Such statements as to the operations and cash position of theatrical ventures do not customarily require the rendering of an opinion by CPAs. No direct verification of assets or liabilities was undertaken." And that's an accounting statement, right? So they just did whatever they wanted to do, basically. Clurman held public hearings, and at that time estimated that the ICE in 1963 was about $10 million a year. That's $75 million in today's money. Just imagine that. Okay, that's a lot. That's just not on the books. And it wasn't flowing to the investors, so investors would invest, but they didn't see any of that going into their profits or even to pay themselves back their initial investment. Now, the term flow is used in all businesses, right? That's the business practice of earning interest on advanced sales. So if a popular show gets, like Hamilton has on Broadway now, has maybe $10 million in advance sales, and there's interest, but it's not going to the investors. It's just going to the theater owners and the producers. The Attorney General had gone after the Shuberts earlier. 1950, they used the antitrust laws to break up some of their empire of theaters. So the Shuberts made a deal after 3 years to sell off a few theaters around the country because they still owned all these theaters around the country that they originally had started to set up from Syracuse. Like the syndicate, they became their own syndicate. The last of the 3 brothers and the most feared, JJ, stories about him are very intense, but colorful because, we're sitting up here. He died in 1963 at the age 86. In his will, he left most of his money and all of the theaters, this was a family operation, remember, to the Shubert Foundation that had been established in 1945 after the older brother, Levi, had died. Sam had died in the mid 1940s. So they made the Sam Shubert Foundation, but it really was a tax shelter. They just started funneling all their profits into the Shubert Foundation. And there were no regulations at that time like there are now about foundations, where foundations have to give away at least 5% of their earnings every year. No, they didn't have to give away anything. But now the Schubert Foundation is the largest funder of theater, nonprofit theaters and dance companies in America. Much more than the National Endowment for the Arts, which the Republicans gutted back during the Mapplethorpe controversy in the 1980s, during the Reagan administration. So the NEA has very little money to give out. And for the Geva Theatre Center, every 2 or 3 years we'll get maybe a $20,000 grant for a certain project from the National Endowment. From the Schubert Foundation, we get up to $90,000 a year that goes into general operating. It's just fundraising, like you give your donations to Geva, they give a donation to Geva every year. It's fantastic. Of course, they're making billions. They have their assets are billions, but they're fantastic. I mean, just the foundation from 2008 to 2014, over those 6 years, they made $50 million in just air rights over their theaters. So it's real estate. It's all about who owns what. And then being on the board of directors of the foundation is like being in the family. It's a very small board, so they reap those benefits. But there were many, many turf battles with the family, when the relatives in the foundation after J.J. died. Earlier, in 1957, J.J. had hired 2 lawyers, Bernie Jacobs and Jerry Schoenfeld, to be their attorneys, the Schubert's attorneys. And they eventually battled with the relatives, and they took over and really ran the organization for the first time like a real company. And you can see some of their, there's a Jacobs Theater, there's a Schoenfeld Theater now on Broadway. They've been renamed. In the early 1970s, Broadway was in steep decline. In 1968, for example, there were 9.4 million attendees on Broadway. In 1970, it dropped to 7.4. 2 years later, 72, it was 5.4. The 70s were disastrous. Why? Well, pop music, people were doing other things in the entertainment industry, like pop music, but also the place was a pet. Times Square was a pet. It was, and there was prostitution and open prostitution and gambling. But they started to rebound with cleaning up Times Square in the late 70s, and then that really dramatic campaign, the I Love New York campaign. I don't know if you remember those TV ads, but Frank Langella was playing Dracula at the time on Broadway, and you saw Dracula going, I love New York in the evening, or whatever he said, in his Dracula voice, which I can't do. But that started picking Broadway back up. But for me, the turning point in all of Broadway came in 1982 with the production of Cats. And I'll tell you why. First, it was Andrew Lloyd Webber's first really big show. And so Andrew Lloyd Webber started cranking out, and this was all a British invasion, right? Cameron Mackintosh produced Cats from England, and he became a Titanic producer of his own. The idea of branding a show, its title and its theme. If you remember Cats, it's still around. Remember Cats, that Now and Forever at the Winter Garden, just the cat eyes sort of underlying. That idea of doesn't matter what the show's about, just brand it well, started with Cats. And they began by, for the first time, attracting global audiences to Broadway shows, to these musicals. So you go to these long-running Broadway musicals, and there are tourists from around the world who don't speak English. But they didn't have to watch Cats, because you're just seeing a bunch of cats in a dump of singing songs. But that was the beginning of the sort of expansion of audiences. Now there are 15.4 million attendees on Broadway. And the Hollywood producer, the film producer Robert Stigwood, said at the time, here's what you do. You duplicate it exactly around the world. And so this is the first time this started happening. And it started happening with Cats, and then moved on to all the shows subsequent to that. Then what I mean by that is that if you go to Tokyo, if you go to Sydney, Australia, if you go to of course, London or Berlin or any of the major cities around the world, and you see Cats, it's exactly the same as the Broadway show. It's not a new interpretation of the material. We do a show, we do Spamalot. It's not like we did last fall. It's not exactly the same. Well, it can't be because we don't have the rights from the director and those original director and designers and stuff. But around they used to do new productions, but now it's replicated exactly like McDonald's or Starbucks. It's a franchise, so you go around and you see a show that originates on Broadway, The Lion King. It's exactly the same, no matter where you see it around the world. And that was a new concept that started in the early 80s. So what followed? Cats, of course, Les Mis, Phantom, Miss Saigon. So Phantom and Les Mis are still on Broadway. Les Mis went away and then came back. And now they're opening a new production of Cats this spring and Miss Saigon later in the year. So those four will still come back. We'll be haunted by them. And then finally Disney came and started doing their big productions, Beauty and the Beast, etc. And of course The Lion King with our wonderful Garth Fagan. That has grossed worldwide, The Lion King, over $6 billion in ticket sales. And so those original creatives, director, choreographer, set designer, costume designer, lighting designer, sound designer, all get a percentage of the weekly gross around the world because it's their work being replicated. And, my dear friend Garth is, because of that, he's able to actually support this company. He makes large donations to his Garth Fagan dance every year just because he gets those royalties. So Razzle Dazzle, I'm going to wind up. Razzle Dazzle is a great, great read. And I really ate it up, even though I've worked my entire life in the nonprofit theater world. I don't work in the for-profit commercial world, but I love reading about all the rascals there. And as you know, we have our those commercial shows come into the Auditorium Theater. The RBTL brings in those for-profit commercial tours that come out of New York. So again, if you're going on tour, if something comes in, they're replicating the Broadway show. Not the same actors generally, but they're replicating that show. But it's a fascinating. If you're interested at all in theater or New York City, I recommend it. And now I'll take questions, and I'll try to repeat the question like I'm supposed to. And this has 150 years worth of rascals in it. So here's questions about New York or Broadway or yes, ma'am. Oh, hi. Right. Right. Yeah, so the question was, Broadway ticket prices are skyrocketing, especially for those popular productions that are sold out. So now, well, everyone got wise. I mean, the producers got wise and said, talk about ICE. I'm going to make the profits, and my investors are going to make the profits. If people are willing to pay ticket brokers all this money above the ticket price, face value, why don't we just raise the face value of the ticket? They can just buy it through Telecharge or Ticketmaster. So yes, to the low-end Broadway orchestra seat now is about, for play, is probably $160. Okay, that's the low-end orchestra seat for a play. For a musical, that's somewhat popular, not a phenomenally sold out thing, but somewhat popular. You're paying $300 certainly for an orchestra seat. Well, you're not paying it if you don't buy it, but they are charging $300 or $350. Hamilton, and which is the new musical that is the rave and just the Tony nominations came out this morning. It broke the record for the number of nominations. It has 16 Tony Award nominations. Hamilton, if you haven't heard about it, is actually the story of Alexander Hamilton in a musical that has rap and funk and Broadway tunes in it. And have I seen it? I can't afford it. But we're trying to see it. My son saw it. Gus stood in line from 7 a.m. to 6:58, 2 minutes before curtain time. He stood in line. He was number 2 in line, and he was one of like 5 people who got seats, little house seats let in, and he paid the only $160 to get an orchestra seat. But he stood in line for 12 hours and did not leave. Yeah. So yes. No. Oh, great question. What's the difference between producers and investors? Great question. Well, they're called, often now they're called producers. If you go to a Broadway show, you'll see 53 different producers on it. But they're generally just, like a managing principal of that, whose job it is to really produce stuff and get investors. And then you can be called a producer or an associate producer, depending upon how much money you invest in it. But producers rarely invest their own money. So it's there's someone who's got to actually do the job of producing, putting the whole thing together, like you would imagine. I mean, I produce the shows at Geva, for example, so I put it all together and all the artists and all that kind of stuff, and so someone has to do that, and that's the sort of lead producer. But that producer gets investors to actually, and to open a musical, it's at least $10 million to raise. But it's a hit or miss business down there. 1 in 10 Broadway shows pay back their investors. So you have to go through the file with the SEC, the Security Exchange Commission, with that you actually have enough assets capable to make an investment into a show, whether it's Broadway or off Broadway. You still have to prove that you can make those investments, so you can lose it. But the ticket pricing anyway has gone, out of sight. It's really extraordinary. But now they're making their money rather than brokers. Yes, John. Yes. Right, so the taxpayers would be the investors of these sports stadiums. Right, and not seeing any money back. Right, because those deals are made outside. Yes, the sports, it happens in sports with ticket brokers. There are a number of big ticket brokers who, and that business has grown. I mean, despite the bad economy, not to get off track too much, a lot of people have made a lot of money over the last decade. A lot of us didn't, but some people did. And there's a lot of money, especially people being well paid in corporations, certain corporations and on Wall Street, to buy tickets. They will pay anything. They just want to go. So and that's happened with sports too. So all these ticket brokers were charging exorbitant prices with sports, and then now all the teams have wised up. Most of the sports teams have wised up, and they're doing their own scalping, their own ticket broker. So I grew up in Boston. If I want to go to a Red Sox game, I can go to ticket brokers and pay $400 for a box seat, or I can go to actually redsox.com and go to their premium seats, and they'll broker it themselves. Yeah. I know. Yes, sir. Yes, great question. The question was, does the Razzle Dazzle cover the off-Broadway, where, for example, the Fantastics have been running for 50 or 60 years? No, because it's primarily around the Schuberts and Broadway. Off-Broadway is its own sort of mini world. I will tell you that they have their own version of the Tony Awards. Now, the Tony Awards are only for Broadway shows. They're not for off-Broadway. They're not for regional theaters. They're just for the Broadway shows, right? But the off-Broadway has their own set of awards, and it was just Sunday night they had their awards. They're named after a longtime off-Broadway producer named Lucille Lortel. So the Lortels were given out, and I'll let you know that the set designer for The May Queen, which we have first previewed tonight, won Best Set Design for a show he did on off-Broadway last year. So we have a off-Broadway award winner designing The May Queen. How about that? It's pretty good. Yeah. We've had, Tony nominees and Tony winners on our stage, but yeah. Other questions about Broadway, the sort of practice down there? It's a closed group, and there's only so many Broadway theaters. It's in a delineated, I don't know what square mile it is, but area of Midtown Manhattan. There are several not-for-profits now, nonprofit theater companies that own Broadway theaters, and the for-profit commercial producers aren't so happy about that because they're getting donors to subsidy, some of what they do. But the Roundabout Theater Company is not-for-profit and owns a Broadway theater. The Manhattan Theater Club owns a Broadway theater. They're nonprofit. Second Stage Theater is not-for-profit, owns, and Lincoln Center. So those are, nonprofits that have many donors like yourself, but they're also producing shows. And the Public Theater has just produced, they're downtown. They're down in the East Village. But the last two Tony Award-winning musicals came out of the Public Theater. Hamilton, it's about to win, and Fun Home. They both came out. Yes? Right, that's a great. So the question is, what about the actors on Broadway, especially the leads? There's always a minimum negotiated Actors Equity Union contract, but the leads get a lot more than that, and that's all negotiated. Sometimes it's a percentage of the gross if they're smart, they think they're in a big hit. But normally it's just a weekly salary, $25,000 a week. For the stars, for the big stars. Oh, well, when they're grossing $1 million, those shows gross $1 million a week. So if the lead, and something just happened. So Hamilton, again, I'll use that, but it's happening with other shows now. The producers just negotiated with that cast who had been through workshops of the development workshops of that musical, did it off Broadway at the Public Theater down in the East Village, and now on Broadway. Some of those actors have been with it the whole time. They sort of made the show along with the writers. They just negotiated a percentage of the profits for those actors, and that's sort of groundbreaking. Those actors who had been part of the developmental process. Great story, and I'll end with this, of a chorus line. Remember a chorus line, right? Well, the chorus line was based on a group of dancers, gypsy dancers, chorus dancers, sitting around drinking wine over several nights and telling their stories into a tape recorder to Michael Bennett, the creator, and Edward Klabon, the writer of it eventually. And they signed off their stories away. So they signed them away. And so they wrote these made characters based on these real people, and crafted theatrical dialogue, but based on those real people. And they never saw a dime until much later, and the estate of Michael Bennett died. The estate started to cut them in a little bit for some of the enormous profits. But actors are the lowest on the totem pole. It's extraordinary because they're not in power to make those deals. They're They're just per contract. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Mark Cuddy, for that informative and entertaining review.